Just because we have gotten things onto the timeline does not mean we are through messing with them. Maybe we made a mistake, maybe our needs change as the program develops, but once it's on the timeline, it's not permanent. We can still add to it, we can still subtract from it, we can still move it to a different place, we can copy it, and we can repeat it. We can do anything that we want to with it. So I've made a couple of mistakes here that will let me work with the trim tool, which is a very powerful tool and one of the more neat parts of editing. So let me show you where I know that I've made a couple of mistakes. Here at the end of stand-up 4, if I play this.
Put our little catcher underneath the spigot here. And now watch.
I cut clip 4 too early. The clip cuts off before he's done talking. So what I really need to do is to make stand-up 4 a little bit longer. There's a couple of ways I can approach this, but let me show you something a little bit tangential first. I don't know if you really noticed it when you were assembling your clips on the timeline, but when you click and drag something from the preview window onto the timeline, as it gets close to another piece of video, it kind of jumps and attaches itself. And you can see it right here. When I have this piece of video far away on the timeline, I can move it back and forth in very small increments. But as I start to get close to the clip in front of it, suddenly it jumps and sticks. And if I move it away, it doesn't move until it jumps away. So there's a gap there. It looks like about 1/4 of an inch on my screen that I simply can't get into. It's as if these clips are magnetized. This is a phenomenon called snapping. And sometimes snapping is your friend, such as when you're stringing a bunch of clips together and you want to make sure there are no gaps between them. But snapping is sometimes annoying. This little icon here that looks like a magnet turns the phenomenon on and off. Or you can use the keystroke N, as in snapping is spelled with an N. I don't know why they used N, but there you go. So I'm going to turn snapping off. And then you'll see that when I click and move this clip, now I am able to move it very close to the other clip without it jumping. Okay, I'll delete that because we don't need it. But that's going to come in very handy when we come in here and start to do our manipulation. So this clip, stand-up 4, needs to be a little bit longer. But I can't just stretch it because there's stuff in the way, right? So what really needs to happen is I need to get these 3 clips moved to the right a bit. I need to take and stretch that clip until Scott finishes talking. And then I need to close up the hole. And what I just did works, right? That was 3 steps. So let me undo all of that. Undo, undo, undo. So step 1, or 4 steps. Step 1 was to select everything to the right of it. Step 2 was to move it out of the way so there was space. Step 3 was to grab the end of this and stretch it. And step 4 was to clean it up by deleting whatever leftover space there was. Now, if I'm using my basic arrow tool, which is the first tool here, and the letter A is your keystroke to select that, I can grab clips and make them shorter or longer. But if I make this longer, notice that it made the clip next to it shorter. Let me undo that. So this might be a case where I want to turn snapping back on. Haha. There we go. It jumps to it. So again, if I just take a clip out here in the middle of nowhere, I can make it shorter or longer just by pointing at the edge of it with my basic tool and clicking and dragging. I can't make it longer than it originally was, but I can make it at least that long. And sometimes that's enough. But here, in this case, I need to make this clip longer, but I need to do it without damaging the clip that comes after it. So rather than selecting these, moving them out of the way, and stretching that, there's a tool called a ripple tool, or a ripple edit, that will allow me to do this. It will make an edit, and the changes will ripple down the rest of the timeline. DaVinci Resolve has a single trim tool here, and if I point at it, you'll see that it says Trim Edit Mode. So I'm going to select that. And now this actually has 4 functions, and it depends on where I'm pointing. So if I put the mouse in the middle of a video clip near the top, you'll see that I have these 2 brackets, and inside the brackets are 2 arrows pointing to the left or the right. This would be a slip edit. If I move it to the bottom of the screen, or I'm sorry, if I move it to the bottom of the video clip, you'll see that the icon changes. It's got the same 2 brackets and the same 2 arrows, but the arrows are now outside of the brackets. This would be a slide clip. If I put it close to an edge, it changes to a single bracket with an arrow on one side. This is a ripple edit, and this is what we're going to be doing in just a moment. And if I put it directly on top of a joint between 2 clips, I get yet a 4th icon, 2 brackets. The brackets are inverted, and the arrows, 2 arrows on the outside of the brackets. This is a rolling edit. Now, what I want to do in this case is a ripple edit. I want to take this stand-up 4 clip and make it longer, pushing the rest of this stuff as I go. So I'm just going to make sure I have the trim tool selected, which I do. I'm going to sneak it up on that right-hand clip until it turns into a single bracket. Now I'm going to click and hold my left mouse button, and then as I move, it will either make that clip longer or shorter, but as it does, it's going to push stuff out of the way. All right, so as I make the clip longer, you can see things moving out of the way. As I make the clip shorter, you can see stuff chasing it, right? So I just made it shorter, which is not what I wanted to do. Let me undo that. And I'm going to turn snapping off, because I don't know if you noticed, but as I was dragging, it was kind of jumping to stick to the playhead or jumping to stick to the spot it used to be. So I am going to turn that off, and then again, using my trim tool, I'm going to sneak up on the right-hand side here till I get that single bracket, and I'm going to click and drag just a little bit to the right. And turn it loose. So I have made this clip a little bit longer. Let's play it and see how I did.
Lock it down tight. You want to be sure on this. And we'll put our little catcher underneath the spigot here, and we're ready to go. Now watch close.
Okay, so I got all of his words, but he turns the machine on there and it starts to brew. Maybe I want it to be just a little bit longer. So again, I'm going to point right at that right-hand edge, make sure that I've got the single bracket, and click and drag to the right just a little bit more. So I'm just going to put a little bit of that machine noise back in there. Okay. Now, the same thing here. I made a mistake down at stand-up 7.
And action. And now we're ready.
I forgot to trim my beginning. Right. So what I want to do. So here's the spot where he's about to start talking. Right. So what I need to do is I need to make this video clip 7, a little bit shorter at the beginning. I could do this with the basic arrow tool. Let me zoom in a little bit just so we can better see what's going on. Right. I could take this clip, make it shorter. And then I could delete the whole. That's not such a bad way to do it. Let me undo that. But I save myself a step if I use the trim tool. So in this case, actually, I might want to turn snapping on, because my playhead is right there where he's about to start talking. So what I'm going to do is, using the trim tool, I'm going to sneak up on this left-hand edit until I see the single bracket appear. So now I know I'm going to do a ripple edit of this in point, and I'm going to click and drag that until it lines up with the playhead, like that. So I have just shortened stand-up 7 without creating any space in my timeline.
And now we're ready to combine our ingredients.
It's a terrible jump cut, but this is where I want it to start, where he starts talking again. Let me zoom out to my entire timeline, Shift-Z. Again, it all starts with making sure you've selected the trim tool and then pointing the mouse at a video clip. And depending where you are in the video clip, you get a different icon. So right now, this is a slip edit. If I move in the lower half of the video clip, this is a slide edit. As I get near a single in point or a single out point, it turns into a ripple edit. And if I put it directly on top of two adjoining clips, that's a rolling edit. The ripple edit, which is what we've been playing with, ripples up and down the timeline. So as I make changes in length to a clip, everything to the right moves to accommodate it. One other thing I can do, even though we've already got video on the timeline, is I can slice it into pieces. So stand up 6 here, if we scroll through it, has talking punctuated by long intervals of him steaming. Right. So we can see in the waveform here, there's a long period of time where he's steaming the milk before he starts to talk again.
Now comes the tricky part. The milk's starting to get good and hot. Now comes the trick.
And this one he actually messes up. So let's pretend that I want to jump from where he's talking here.
And then I'll show you how to put a nice froth on the top of it.
Down to where he gets this line correct.
Get good and hot. And we can tell by the...
I want to get rid of everything in between there. Now, I could have done that originally by coming up here with stand up 6. I could have marked an in point and an out point and dragged this portion of the video onto the timeline. And then I could have marked a new in point and a new out point and dragged that portion of the video onto the timeline. But I didn't do that. I've got this big piece of video here. So this is what the razor blade tool is good for. So I'm going to select that. B for blade if you're a keyboard person. Notice that when I point at a clip on the timeline, the icon transforms into a razor blade. So I'm going to go just here where I can see he's finished talking, and I'm going to click once and see that that made a cut. So what used to be one piece of video is now 2 pieces of video. Now, if I play this, you won't see anything, you won't hear anything. There's no damage.
in the picture, and then I'll show you how to put a nice froth on the top of it.
All right, so now I want to find the second half of this.
The milk's starting to get good and hot.
Okay. He's about to say, now comes the tricky part. He started his line over. I'm going to leave the playhead there. I'm going to make sure that snapping is turned on because it's going to help me. I'm going to grab my razor blade and I'm going to line it up with the playhead and click once. All right, so now I'm going to go back to my basic arrow tool here. So what used to be 1 clip is now 3 clips, right? So I have a piece of video that I want to keep here at the beginning. I have a piece of video that I want to keep here at the end. And I have some boring stuff I want to get rid of. So just select that stuff in the middle. And again, if I hold Shift and hit Delete, it will remove the clip and close the space up. Now this is going to be a bit of a jump cut, but again, I'll fix that later.
In the picture, and then I'll show you how to put a nice froth on the top of it. Now comes the tricky part.
And after he finishes talking, I can see that he steams on for a bit. So I'm just going to get rid of that. I'm going to grab the razor blade. I'm going to make a cut down here somewhere after I can see the waveform as he stopped talking. I'll switch back to my basic arrow tool, select that piece of nothing, and hit Shift Delete to get rid of it and to close the space. So that's the beginning of trimming. Working with the trim tool and working with the razor blade to refine your project even after you've gotten it on the timeline. Next, we'll look at adding some B-roll to this.